The important people are all here, that's you. So why don't we get started with the word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather, to listen to and hear your word. Help us to understand your word, and help it to inspire us to become better servants for you, not only today but days to come. Amen. We are living over our little COVID thing. Again, I tested again this morning. My temperature this morning, and it was at 97, so I think we're good. We were very lucky. We were really only one day. If it was that, it was one day, and that was it. By the second day, it was really nothing. And in fact, if we hadn't had a test kit, we'd have thought we'd have had sinus headaches. So anyway, to get back to the beginning, everybody should have a sheet. Everybody have a sheet?
Yep.
All right. So last week we were talking about how Peter and John ended up in front of the same group of individuals that Jesus had to defend himself against, called the Sanhedrin. Now, what exactly did the Sanhedrin tell Peter and John that they couldn't do anymore?
They weren't allowed to heal anybody anymore, right?
Well, that was part of it, but what else weren't they allowed to do? That's right, they weren't allowed to preach. So, they weren't allowed to preach. Well, apparently, if you recall last week, that went in one ear and out the other. So they started preaching again. And when they did, they gathered a group of, quote, followers. We don't know how many followers there were. Okay, but it sounds like a sizable group. So when the followers got together and heard all of Peter and John's preaching, what did they decide to do as a group?
To go out to...
Well, they decided to do that, but they decided to do something else. We talked about it. We used the word commune.
Share everything.
Yeah, they were going to share everything. Okay, so basically the idea was that if you recall, the words were anybody who had a need was taken care of. All right, so today we would call that a commune, and there were a lot. Believe it or not, in the United States there were lots of them. As a matter of fact, the Mayflower Compact, which, from the pilgrims who gave us Thanksgiving, was a communal pact where everybody shared everything. And most of the initial land grants to when a group of followers would come to the New World, they would be given parcels of land, and they would parcel that out to individuals, and then they would share everything. What they grew, and whatever, from the livestock or whatever. So that it wasn't all that uncommon even at that time. So this is where we begin the story. Everybody has decided that we're going to share everything with each other. No one with a need is ever going to be going away needy. And then an unusual thing happens. Okay, this is one that pastors don't like to preach on. But it's there. And that is Acts chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Would anybody like to read that?
Sure, I can read it. 1 to 11. Okay. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold, and after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? They have not lied just to human beings, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. In great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, "Tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land?" "Yes," she said, "that is the price." Peter said to her, how could you conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord? Listen, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in, and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events.
Okay. What's the issue here? The real issue.
You really stole from God.
Exactly. It wasn't so much the money. God doesn't need the money. Right? In case you haven't heard, God doesn't need the money. God's people need the money, but God doesn't need the money. All right, so basically what the issue was, Keith, say it again?
Stole from God.
Stole from God. They lied. That was the issue. If they had come clean from the beginning, then things might have turned out a little differently. Now, pastors don't like to preach on this because obviously that this leads to a whole lot of questions about if I keep 5 cents for myself, is this what's going to happen to me? Well, you can see from sitting around the table that's not the case. The case is, who am I lying to if I create wealth? Especially if I hide it somewhere. Now, I don't think any of you have any financial investment guys or ladies who hide all kinds of money in foreign accounts and all that other kind of stuff.
That's where my money
You know, the Cayman Islands or a Swiss bank account. Used to be the big thing was a Swiss bank account because it wasn't traceable. And, so basically, that's what these two did. They basically took part of the money away, and they put it away somewhere that they thought no one would find it.
So what if, when this whole thing came up, these two people had said, we don't want to agree to that, we want to do something separate?
Okay, then they could have said that.
But I think that there's also that thing of, well, everybody else is doing it, I guess we should agree that we'll do it too. And that way we're part of the community. They may have done it begrudgingly.
Yeah. The example that comes up more often than not is, let's suppose all of you got together and got into one of these lottery ticket buying things, you know, where everybody puts in $1 and somebody goes out and buys the tickets. Okay? And one of you, one week, doesn't kick in $1. Can't, you know, wasn't here, whatever the reason. And that's the week, that you win the big money. Now, one of you didn't kick in. So is that person entitled to a share?
Yeah.
See, that's the real question here. You know, it's is that person entitled to a share? I mean, that person may have given you $1 for for weeks for the last 5 years, but didn't put it in this time. By the way, 1.9 billion in the Powerball, so you might want to get into one of those things. In fact, her father, who we're going to honor today, set up a corporation for his family. Actually had a written document signed by a lawyer, and what were you, the secretary or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, so basically, if it ever won any money, it would have instructions in there as to how it's going to be split and all that other kind of stuff, and how if they won under a certain amount of money, it was reinvested in the company, which means he bought more tickets with it. But seriously, what happens if you agree that yes, I'm going to give 10% of whatever I make to the church. Okay, great. Now all of a sudden I hit the $1.9 billion big money. Now I stop and think, well, that's 10%. 10% is what is it, $190 million. So I mean, now is that 10% really 10%? That's the real question here. It's not.
Is it 10% before or after tax?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what they call the modern tithe, by the way. Seriously, there is a modern tithe, and that's because people have finally recognized that with all of you can't just go by on what you make, because the taxes are taking out what, 35% of that.
And again, that's where the question comes in with Presbyterians. should I pledge something? If something happened and I don't go through with the pledge, that's not right. So should I pledge or should I just give money and go from there?
Yeah, exactly.
Should I pledge?
Most pledge cards say unless conditions change. Now, I could tell you that we have a niece who's really a character. Her name was Nicole. And she was a member of a church, and I forget what church it was, but she had fallen behind on her giving. But she needed something from the church. And the pastor actually told her, well, since you only gave 60% of your pledge, I'm only going to give you 60% of what I'm supposed to give you. So keep in mind, it's not the money is not the issue. It's the fact that they lied about it. And somehow Peter knew about it in advance. So now Peter all of a sudden is becoming a little clairvoyant, or somehow has got his pulse on what's going on with him.
Like somebody's mother. Mothers can usually tell.
Well, he's got his pulse on what's going on here, okay? So now he's more than their leader. Now he's sort of like their, like you say, maybe their father in a way.
You can tell.
So see how he's evolved now? Remember, he started out shaking in his shoes behind that door. Now all of a sudden he's sort of the surrogate father to all of these followers, and in a way he's the enforcer. So his personality is changing. He's becoming more and more forceful. He's becoming more and more confident. Would you say he's becoming more and more of what Jesus expected him to?
Yeah.
I would say so. Now keep in mind, this is written secondhand. So we have to assume that Luke is reporting this accurately. Okay? Because what else can we assume? So, because some would say, well, if what Luke is doing is he's slanting the story so Peter ends up the way you want him to. Well, I can't argue with that, or one way or the other. But I can tell you that based on what I do see, what you do see, I think we agree that he's becoming more and more of the rock. Okay, so now this group of followers is growing. Problem is, there's no place for them to meet. They don't have a building, okay? In those days, when people would meet, they'd meet in some public place somewhere. And we're going to learn about Solomon's colonnade, which is one of the gates that goes into the temple. Okay, that's where they decided that they were going to meet together. So this group would just kind of gather, and Peter and John would be there. So here's an interesting look at the scene. So I'd like someone from you to read Acts 5:12-16.
Yeah, I read it. The apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders among the people, and all the believers used to meet together at Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Nevertheless, more and more people and men believed in the Lord and were added to the number. As a result, people brought the sick to the streets, and I lost my mind, and laid them on beds and mats, so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on them, on some of them as they passed by. Crowds gathered also from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by evil spirits, and all of them were healed.
Look what it says about Peter here. That his shadow would touch them. What is this group starting to believe? What's that?
Peter's got very miraculous powers, but it kind of parallels, like people just wanting to touch the hem of Jesus' garment.
Exactly. They believe that all of a sudden Peter now had the same power Jesus had. Well, he kind of does if you think about it. But remember all those that touched Jesus' garment and were healed? So they wanted Peter's shadow. Can you imagine what this must have looked like? Here are all these people laid out on, and so when Peter walks by, they're all trying to cranny it over, and you see, to get Peter's shadow on them. So this is the reputation that that has been built about him. Somehow now people are believing that Peter is now gaining the same power that Jesus had, or at least some of it. And he had the ability to heal, because after all, Peter and John have healed somebody, haven't they? So that's already happened. And notice it says, they brought all kinds of people, the sick and tormented by evil spirits, all of them were healed. Doesn't say if Peter did it, maybe, notice it says the apostles, there were others there with them. Excuse me, so my guess is that it was not only John, but maybe a couple of others like Philip or someone like that. And they were together doing this wonderful work. So the word is getting out. Okay? And whenever you have a big group of people that shows up every day, other people have a tendency to notice. Like I said, when I worked downtown in the early 80s, you had a lot of religious zealots that were in downtown Cleveland. And each one had their own little spot that was theirs. And nobody dared, take Tambourine Lady, for example, would camp out right in front of the Soldiers and Sailors Mine. That was her spot. And she'd be out there with that tambourine, and people, the crowd would gather. There was a guy that had a straw hat and a real ugly looking lime green coat, and he would walk around in front of alleys and say, "Hey, you there, that's your wife? You over there, you look like you need the Lord," But that was his spot. Nobody else could go there.
There's a woman and a maybe teenage girl in England. They stand near the road waiting for people to come over and ask them questions about God. They have signs.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah. What I'm saying is,
They're everywhere.
Standing with signs, just waiting for somebody to come over and want to talk to them about God.
but what I'm saying is, you notice them. Well, that's what happened here. All of a sudden, these people are together. Notice it also said people wanted to join them, but they were afraid. Well, maybe what we just read before that might have something to do with it. But the point of the matter is that these individuals were becoming sort of like a set-apart group among themselves. But they were growing. And as I said, people had a tendency to notice. Well, who do you think would notice if this was happening at the temple all the time? What group of individuals who may not like this whole thing? What's that? Yeah. Well, the priests, the members of the Sanhedrin, the high priest, whoever. And also there was a Roman garrison on the grounds of the temple. So there was, so all of a sudden, all these people are walking by and they're, oh, wait a minute, I thought we told these guys not to do this anymore, and look at this! So this one's going to be a lengthy reading, so I would like someone to read Acts 5, 17, 30 to 32 to find out what happened to Peter and John when push came to shove here.
Then the high priest and all his associates, who were members of the party of the Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. They arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. And during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out. Go stand in the temple courts, he said, and tell the people the full message of this new life. At daybreak, they entered the temple courts, as they had been told, and began to teach the people. When the high priest and his associates arrived, they called together the Sanhedrin, full assembly of the elders of Israel, and sent to the jail for the apostles. But on arriving at the jail, the officers did not find them there. So they went back and reported. We found the jail securely locked with the guards standing at the doors. When we opened them, we found no one inside. On hearing this report, the captain of the temple guard and the chief priests were puzzled, wondering what will come of this. Then someone came and said, "Look, the men you put in jail are standing in the temple courts teaching the people." At that, the captain went with his officers and brought the apostles. They did not use force because they feared that the people would stone them. Having brought the apostles, they made them appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. "We gave you strict orders not to teach in this name," he said. "Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teachings and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised Jesus from the dead, whom you had killed by hanging him on a tree. God exalted him to his own right hand as Prince and Savior, that he might give repentance and forgiveness of sins to Israel. We are witnesses of these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him."
Okay. So, all of a sudden again, here's Peter being the spokesperson. Notice it says apostles. Okay, so there's obviously, the way I read that, it's got to be John and some others. All right, so there's a whole group of them there. This is the same bunch that got Pilate to put Jesus to death. The Sanhedrin could not condemn a person to death. They could only condemn them to be kicked out of the church and all that other stuff. The only way you could condemn a person to death was make them a menace to the peace. Okay, you notice it said about the temple guards, how they didn't use force. I think they were allowed to carry weapons, but I don't think they actually, they weren't allowed to carry anything all that substantial. Because in theory, they didn't have the right to arrest and detain anybody, but they did in this case. So only the Romans could put somebody to death and, do what they did to Jesus and so on and so forth. So the idea was, let's put a stop to this before it gets to the point where they're going to go after, where the peace gets and they're going out of the way, and they're going to have to go after us. And if they go after us, they're going to throw us out of here, and we lose. We got a good thing going here. Let's keep it going. Notice it says that they were with jealousy. Right?
Yeah.
You got a good thing going. You don't want to mess it up. It's remember when we were talking about in the last Bible study, remember when Paul went to the town where they were making all those statues of the gods, and Paul had taught them a new religion, and all of a sudden all these guys were out of work? They weren't too happy. That's what the priests felt was going to happen. If this new faith ever catches on, they don't need us anymore. They won't pay for us to live in all these fancy places we live, and they won't pay for the fancy clothes, and they won't pay for all our meals, and they won't pay for all of that. We'll have to get a job. Excuse me.
Did the Jewish people, they had to pay Roman taxes, right?
Right, yes.
And for the temple, did they also have to pay
Yes, they
for
did.
that? So if they're doing communal living now and they're following Jesus, did they stop paying the temple because they're not following?
Right, exactly. See, remember, the Romans could put you in jail for not paying taxes. These people couldn't. The only thing they had going for them was the law of Moses, and that was reinterpreted. So, for example, whenever a child was born, you had a specific thing you had to do, and it cost you money. whenever a child turned 12 years old, a male turned 12 years old, you had to go back to the temple. There was a sacrifice you had to do, and that cost you money. All of the certain festivals, all the Jewish males within 25 miles of the temple had to go there and do their sacrifice, and that cost you money. All the meat from the sacrifices was eaten by the priests. So if you don't go and do any of that, then now all of a sudden they realize that, hey, you know, our market's going to disappear here. And not only because before that, they didn't have to worry about that because they were the only game in town. Make sense?
Yeah, the only thing that was slightly confusing, you said Jesus still followed, because he was Jewish, he still followed certain
Yes, he
Jewish
did.
practices. So, did the apostles also still follow those certain practices even though they were Christian?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to get into that a little later. Hold that thought for the rest of the group, because you're going to see where Paul and Peter get into it over that very issue. Remember, they also had the issue that we talked about before, where the apostles had to debate whether you had to become a Jewish person first before you could become a Christian. And they decided, no, you didn't have to do that. And so, yeah, that was where the split began to go. but you know, when you stop and think about it, this whole institution, okay, remember we talked a couple of weeks ago about the priestly families? All these high priests were only in a few families, and they were being well taken care of. They didn't want to give that up. But, you know, so what you know, we're going to find out that Peter really had to struggle with the question you just asked. And that's a discussion for another day, but let's file that in the index card. But yeah, that was something that bothered them. You know, because we're followers of Jesus, and Jesus now wants us to go and talk to the Gentiles, and you don't have to be Jewish first to be a Christian. Now, what about us? Okay, because we were brought up to, you know, to know what the law is, and that's going to be an interesting discussion from this point forward as to what side of the fence Peter's on this whole thing. But again, stop and think of what's going on here. They put the apostles in jail. For some strange reason, they didn't stay there. Okay? Does this remind you of another story when we were talking about Paul?
Yeah.
When was that?
Well, the angels let them out too.
After a what? A catastrophic event occurred.
Okay, yes.
Which was what?
Earthquake?
Yeah, it was an earthquake. So they had an earthquake, and the angels didn't let them out. What they did is they opened the doors and they stayed there.
Yeah, yeah.
And the jailer said, well, you know, if you guys had gotten away, they would have killed me. He says, well, the fact that you didn't get away, you must have something going. Remember, the jailer and his family became Christian.
Yeah.
So this is not unusual in the scriptures that, you know, that angels would intervene in cases like this. But notice, but they were also told to go back and continue doing what they were doing. They just put you in jail. Somehow you got out. I don't know about you, but I'd be somewhere around North Dakota by now. But they were told, no, don't leave. Just go back and forget it all ever happened. And so now the Sanhedrin has come, and they have tried to find him, and all of a sudden they found him, and now they brought him back again. And Jesus, Jesus's death was brought up to them. That was the person they said, you want to make us guilty of that man's blood. They were talking about Jesus. So here Peter's going through this theology again. Think about it. He was a fisherman. All of a sudden he's become a pretty good student of theology. I mean, he's got this thing pretty well nailed. Now, the Sanhedrin already said to Jesus, you know, let's give them to Pilate, let them figure it out. Actually, they gave him to Herod first. Herod didn't want to bother, so they gave him to Pilate. So that, you know, the apostles were figuring, maybe that might be what happens to us. But then again, what would be the risk if they decided to go the way they went with Jesus? What's that?
The same thing will happen again.
Yeah. All of a sudden, instead of one resurrection, now I got 5, 6, 8 of them. And you know, so we don't know if we want to do that. We got to think of something else. So when they're debating all of this, an interesting person appears. Now, keep in mind the name, because those of you in the last Bible study will recognize the name. So I would like someone to read Acts 5:33 to 42.
All good for Christ. When they heard this, they were furious and wanted to put them to death. But a Pharisee named
Gamaliel.
Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside of the law. Then he addressed them. Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do with these men. Some time ago, terrorists appeared claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, and all his followers were dispersed, and it all came to nothing. After him, Judas, the Galilean, accused the invasion of the census, and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the presence I advise you, leave these men alone, let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourself fighting against God. His speech persuaded them. They called the apostles in and had them flogged. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and let them go. The apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped preaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Christ.
Okay. We've heard the name Gamaliel before. With our study of Paul. Who was Gamaliel to Paul? He was his teacher. Gamaliel was Paul's teacher. So in looking at it in a very simple means, what is it that Gamaliel is telling them?
That you could do the wrong thing. Like, you could kill these people and their followers could just make it into something really great. Or maybe nothing could happen, and the followers would just all leave. But, you know, you can't make it change. It's all up to what happens, and if God's involved and so on, you may not be able to stop it, even if you did kill somebody.
Right. He's saying, look at, remember, there were hundreds of messiahs running around in those days. And each one of them had little groups of followers. And what Gamaliel is saying is when every one of these people died, the followers disappeared and nothing ever happened. Okay? So, these two may be just like them. And if they're just like them, we don't have to do a thing because they'll both die and their followers will disappear and we won't have to worry about them. But what's really going on here is what he's doing is he's arguing what they call the philosopher's lament, which goes something like this. Each of you has to decide whether to believe in God. That's everybody's choice, okay? Now let's look at it from a logical perspective. If you choose to believe in God and follow what God says we're supposed to do in life, then we're going to live a life that's a lot less fun than, all of the, the people that don't believe in God, that feel they can do anything. Okay? So we're going to live a little bit less of a life. Now, if I choose not to believe in God, I can do whatever I want because there's going to be no retribution. Right? So the philosopher says, look, if I believe in God and do what God says, and God in the end doesn't exist, then I would have lived a life that was a little less fun. But if I don't believe in God and break laws and do all that stuff, and God does exist, now I'm going to be tormented for the rest of my life, future, eternally. So the best thing to do is believe in God. Because that's, from that, that's the best case scenario. Well, that's what Gamaliel is saying. We're not sure which side this is going to go on. But the best case scenario is these guys are just a couple of characters who really don't have any power to do anything, and when their time comes, they'll disappear, and we won't have to worry about them. But on the off chance they really are, empowered by God, and we do something to them, we're all going to be tormented for the rest of our lives. So the best chance scenario is not to do anything. See? Now,
Fighting against God.
well, think about it. The rest of them wanted them to take care of it. Remember, they couldn't condemn anybody to death, but they could get the Romans to do it. Notice also, too, they had them flogged. Apparently, flogging was a public way of saying, you guys are naughty and don't do it anymore. But what did it mean when it said that now they rejoiced because of what? For the name. What's the name?
Jesus.
Yeah. So they were, what they're saying is, remember, Jesus got flogged too.
Yeah.
So we got flogged just like he got flogged. Therefore, we're on the right path here. So now, Peter is, again, the leader of this band. He's the one that's doing all the talking. He's the one that is standing up to the people. And quite frankly, I'm not sure whether he knew what the outcome was going to be. But it took guts. And because of the fact that they had suffered the same way that Jesus had suffered, they felt very, very strongly that they had done something good. And then how did that section end? What did the apostles do after that?
Going back to preaching and talking and all that stuff.
Yeah, but where else did they, before they had been just in that one spot. Now what were they doing?
They went house to house.
They went from house to house, and so it sounded like I said, there's more than just the two of them, and it sounds like they're maybe doing what the Mormons do. I haven't had a Mormon visitor in a while. Have you had Mormon visitors?
Or Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
Or Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses are more common, but yeah, we've had Mormon visitors in our, because they have to go on a mission trip, and then they get assigned a territory, and then they knock on doors and do mission work and all that kind of stuff. We've had the Jehovah's Witnesses before too, and so I remember they even tried to visit us at a golf course. So I was preaching at First Lorraine. I said, if they come over and talk to us, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for them and see what they do about that. Yeah. Also, have you ever dealt with Pentecostals?
Not too much.
A Pentecostal will pray for you for just about anything. So when I did my hospital visitation, if I had a Pentecostal patient, I had to wait for them to pray for me to pray for them. So there are a lot of denominations that believe in what these people were doing, going door to door and you know, trying to get the message out. Because remember, at that time, it was a new message. It was a new message. This is not like it is today where everybody seems to know what church is all about and all that kind of stuff. This was a brand new message. It's like selling a new product. Or, unfortunately, like you know, politicians going from door to door. Have any of you had any visit you yet this year?
No, but years ago I went to vote in Euclid, and this guy was standing there, and he said he wanted to shake my hand, and I said, no thank you, and he said, but I'm the mayor of Euclid, and I said, so what? And I moved on, and he was in my party, but I just didn't like the idea that he thought you had to shake his hand before you went to vote.
They don't really do it much anymore.
No,
make
they
phone-
don't.
They
No.
make phone calls and everything now, or,
No.
you know, like,
Yeah,
emails and
'cause
stuff
it-
like that.
They did then.
But I know when we first moved in our house, people would come
Mhm.
and, you know.
I was standing
go
there
vote.
right near the election area waiting to
Yeah.
shake your hand. It's like, I don't want to shake your hand.
See, that's the thing. You know, face-to-face, eye-to-eye is the best way to get the job done, and that's what they were doing. And like I said, it was a new message. They weren't trying to sell you a message that you already knew something about. Okay? Whereas today, when somebody comes and talks to you about, do you believe in God and all that, you've been through that before. So it, you know, it is not all that unusual to understand why the group was growing. There was also one other reason why that was the case. What was the, you know, and Leona hit on it. All of a sudden, all of these rules and regulations and things that, you know, the common people had all kinds of trouble with were out the window. I mean, that's a big thing. For example, there were Presbyterian churches in our presbytery where you had to have a communion card in order to be served communion, and the deacon had to come and give it to you.
You had to have a what?
A communion card, actual card. You had to present it to the Bob Hughes used to do that. So, you know, you just didn't, you know, communion didn't go to everybody. It had only the select few that behaved themselves and, you know, that came to the church and did all that.
There's one group that believes that only so many people are going to heaven too.
Yeah.
I forget which group that is, there's a group.
144,000?
Yeah.
144,000.
Yeah, there's only a certain group of people that are going to
That's
heaven.
There's no more room up there.
Huh?
That's Jehovah's Witness, isn't it?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah, well, we believe in predestination, a lot more than 144,000.
Yeah.
No,
I think I'm being left out.
yeah. But
There's no
think,
more room, we got our number.
so you've got a brand new religion that all of a sudden you don't have to qualify for. There's no group that's going to decide whether, you know, you give you the white ball or the black ball. You know about the white ball and the black ball? How, you know, when they vote somebody in, they put a ball underneath the cup, and if any of them are black, you don't get in. And that's how they vote. That's how they do it. But so here is Peter saying that, guess what? You guys, you took care of the one person that was sent to save all of you. You did it. You know, you did it. And until you own up to it, you guys are in trouble. And we're going to go tell the people that, yes, that Jesus was who we think he was. And therefore, this group is growing. All right? And so keep that in mind as we go along. Now, one of the questions Leona asked, and I did some research on this, was why the Jewish people still today do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And you asked that? I did some looking into it, and basically the reason is they were and are still under the impression that the Messiah is going to restore them as a group of people in the kingdom like David had. Okay? You know, power, land, influence, all that. Because look at what's happened to them. They've been scattered all over the world. And where they were, in fact, if Jews lived in England, say in medieval times, what could a Jewish person do? Anybody know?
Be a servant?
No. They could not own land.
Mm.
So what do you think the Jewish people became? They couldn't own land. What are they? What everybody thinks they are today? They became the bankers, the lawyers, and all that stuff where you didn't have to own land. So they're scattered all over the place. There's only 14 million of them. I mean, there's 11 million living in Ohio as a state. And they were thinking that this Messiah, when this person shows up, is going to fix all of that. The Holocaust, for example, wouldn't have happened if the Messiah had come. You see what I'm saying? None of this would have occurred, so they're looking at it strictly from their point of view. Over the years, they have, their influence and whatnot has begun to dissipate. And not only that, they're persecuted everywhere they live. So they were assuming that Jesus didn't do anything about that. Instead, what Jesus was saying is, we got to make more, we're going to open the doors for people other than you. Right? People other than you. So if that's the case, then Jesus did not fit the bill that Jewish people were looking for. In fact, Jesus was doing exactly the opposite.
So they really believe that he's still coming.
Oh yeah, they really believe that he's still coming, and when that happens, Zion will be reborn, and all those kinds of things will occur. And when you look at it from their point of view, if you remember when David was king, they were like the premier society in that part of the world. And ever since then, they've lost that. And the Messiah was supposed to, coming from David's line, was supposed to return them to that scenario. And guess what? We're still waiting. So that's why. So now Peter and John, and this is the apostle, Peter, and we're going to find out as being one of the ringleaders, is opening the door for not only the Jewish people, but a whole lot of others. And that is one of the reasons why Peter and Paul and all the early apostles were persecuted by the Jews, because they were a closed society. If you were a guy, there were certain things you had to do, and they were permanent. And all of a sudden they're saying, well, no, you don't have to do that. What do you mean you don't have to do that? My dad, I did that, my father did that, my grandfather did that, my great-grandfather did that. Now all of a sudden we don't have to do that? What's going on here? As an aside, one of the things my relatives got mad about in the Catholic Church was when they stopped doing services in Latin. And you'd think, I'd be the happiest guy in the world. Now I can understand what the priest is saying. But no. That's the way we always did it. You can't change that. There was also a lot of my relatives that were upset that you could eat meat on Friday. Because that's what they were taught from childhood. So there's a lot of the dogma that's going on in the Jewish faith right now is what is the issue here. They don't want to lose that. And they see in Peter and his outspokenness, they see that as a threat.
And I think, in a way, I would encourage people to read different kinds of books to get an idea of what people think should be happening or is going to happen in the future that shows all these things that could be happening. Like the books Left Behind are not true, but they give you an idea of what people expect. They expect that this is going to happen next, and this is going to happen next, and this is in the New Testament, and there's also things in the Old Testament that supposedly are going to happen. It gives you an idea of of what people expect, whether they really happen or not, I don't know.
Yeah, well, keep that in mind, and next week we will not, we have our potluck, so we will not be having Bible study because there's so many people involved in the potluck, it really wouldn't be fair. Right, Leona? So we will not have Bible study next week, so keep that in mind, and I'll put that on the website. But I appreciate your time and attention. So far, we've seen Peter go from just a simple fisherman who can't figure out which side of the boat to put the net on, to all of a sudden standing up to the most powerful religious group he knew of, and telling them the story of who Jesus was and how committed he was. So we're seeing this path move on, okay?